In this video, we're going to add some more detail and smooth out the bolt-on fender flare for our MR2. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to carry on with our over fender for the MR2 based off of the scan data. Now, in the last video, we created the basic shape. So that was the first step, is to sort of rough in what we want. And then we can go back and we can sort of tweak and adjust the layout of all these edges to make sure that we're happy with the shape and the design before we begin to add some more detail. So looking at this design, the first couple things that I want to note, and that's going to be the location of star points. You can see that we've got one here where we've got 5 edges coming together. We've got one here, again, 5 edges coming together. And we've got one here where we've got these 5 edges coming together. But we've managed to avoid the star points in most other locations. If we carry on, in this case, extruding some edges like right here, notice that we've got 1 and 2 coming in, 3 and 4 already. And then if we extrude out, we'll have a 5th one there. So again, we will have that star point to deal with. Now, star points aren't necessarily a make or break thing. That doesn't mean that the design is junk and we need to trash it. It's going to be something that we are going to have to deal with. Triangles or 5-sided nGons, they're just going to happen whenever we start to change directions. And you're not going to be able to get around them, so we need to be able to work with them and make sure that we understand the tools like utilities and repair body that can go in and easily fix potential surface issues. We're not to that point yet, but at this stage we're going to go into box display mode, and we need to think about where the design is heading. I've already mentioned that some of the way in which these edges are sort of flowing through the design are problematic and we need to fix it. But another thing that I'm thinking of here is the original design intent was to sort of attach to this intake scoop on the car. Now, that allows us to sort of leave all of the OEM details that are associated with that part of the fender and then just sort of attach to the outside. But we are missing an opportunity because what we're doing is we're making an extremely wide fender. We're making something that's really wide and flared out. And then we're sort of attaching to where the stock intake was. So as I'm looking at this design and as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking the best way forward is to actually carry this edge all the way down to here. And then we can flare out and make the intake scoop a little bit more dramatic. We can make it more in line with what we're doing here. And it could be converted to maybe dual channels. You keep the sort of path of the original and you split it into 2 for maybe brake cooling. You could add another one down here for brake cooling ducting or exhaust because, again, the engines in these cars are back here. They're not in the front like they are with a traditional front engine car. So there is, intake air that has to come from here. There is potential cooling for things like oil coolers. If the car is turbo and you're using an air-to-air intercooler, then you have to get air into those somehow. So there are a lot of things that we could use that extra air for. So before we get into sort of fixing these edges and adding more detail, let's go ahead and let's connect these two. This can be done in a couple different ways. The best way that I can think of is for me to go to Bridge and go from this edge to this edge. I'm going to turn on Preview because I want to see what this looks like. And I'm going to change the number of faces to 1 and then say OK. And the reason I'm changing it to 1 is because I want to determine exactly where those divisions are. I know that it's not going to match the shape of the body at this stage, but I want to be able to determine exactly where I'm going to split those up so I can match the rest of the body. So I'm going to go to Modify. I'm going to say Insert Edge. And notice that it's going the wrong direction. So I'm going to say minus 0.5 and put it right in the middle. Then I'm going to select it again, right-click marking menu to repeat. This time we're going to do both. I'm going to say OK. And now we've got an edge that can line up here. We've got one that can line up here. And then we've sort of got these 2 down here. So we're going to need another division somewhere. That means that this one that's right in the middle is not going to really be in the correct position because if we break it up and we sort of use that division where we go 50-50 or both directions, it's not going to give us the right result. So what I'm going to do is Insert Edge, use both, but I'm going to reduce this to 0.25. Then I'm going to take the center edge and delete it. So again, it helps me use the tools that we have at our disposal, and then it allows me to sort of make adjustments. Now I want to begin to mimic the curve of the door, keeping in mind that we sort of went out and then back in, and on the car there is a body line that happens right here, and it carries down here, and the factory carries it around that intake scoop. We're going to try to replicate that. So I'm going to leave this little creased edge here. It's not creased, but it's sort of changing direction. And we're going to have to incorporate that down here as well, where this sort of travels over that door. We're not worried about it right now, but we are going to have to deal with that at some point. And also keep in mind that this face, if we carry this around, you can kind of see how it travels here. This opening here, this is where we've got those star points that we have to deal with, right? So star point here, and then all this stuff in the middle is going to attach to the body, the scan of the fender and the door, and we're going to try to match that shape. So this is going to be the one that we're going to use to define the shape of that intake. We're going to push all of this stuff out, and we're going to do that by deleting these edges, moving this out to where we want it, and then redividing it up. So again, we get that smooth geometry. But at this stage, what we want to do from the side is we want to start to mimic the door line. So I'm going to go to Modify, and I'm just going to begin moving these back to a position. I'm not scaling them. I'm not readjusting their size. I'm just moving them to a position that works for the design. And again, visually, as we look at it, I want these pointing toward these vertices. So you can see that's pointing there. This one's pointing here. This one's pointing here. And also, again, I didn't scale them. I kept the consistent width because when we did a bridge from this edge down to this edge, it automatically tapered it out to match the width. So we went from this one edge to this one. There were different lengths. So we already accounted for that in that bridge tool. So I want to keep all of those different scales, and I don't want to adjust that by scaling them. So I just simply wanted to move them. It doesn't matter that the intake started before this on this design because we're going to make our own. We're going to push it back a bit further on the fender, and we're going to add that detail. So now that I'm happy with that, we're going to say okay. And again, what I want to do is I want to get rid of maybe this entire division. I don't really know, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to hit delete, and then I'm just going to see what this looks like. Okay? So very gradual change. If we kind of rotate this around, you can see that's a very smooth, gradual change out to our wheel arch. So that looks pretty good, and that tells me that I'm on the right direction. Now I'm going to view this from the front. I'm going to see if I can see everything I need. And from the front, I cannot really see the edge that I'm interested in. So this, and this, those three, from the front, they're kind of hidden. So I'm just going to pull them out. And I still want a little bit of flare. I still want this to flare out. And you'll notice that in this orientation, we're getting closer to the bottom. So reset that pivot point up here. And then we're going to use rotation. And 5 degrees is going to be too much. So I'm going to manually enter 1 degree. Not quite enough. I'm going to manually enter 2 degrees. Gets me a bit closer. And then I want to scale those horizontally. And I'm going to do that to get it to be more of a vertical line. And at this point, that's what we're looking for. Again, let's hop back into Smooth Display. You can see that this is starting to be a little bit smoother because now we're sort of controlling that geometry, but we also want to exaggerate that as well. So I want to pick those same 3 edges, but this time on that little inner lip. I'm going to go to a front view, and I'm going to pull those out as well. And again, the same thing. We're going to reset the pivot point, and then we are going to rotate this. But again, I'm going to try 2 degrees. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to scale them vertically. In this case, we're scaling along the x-axis, which is horizontal, but it's going to scale them inline vertically. And I can set that to 0, and then I'm going to say OK and just view what we've done. What we're going to end up doing, I think, is going to divide this section up more once we're happy with the shape. And that's going to allow us to start to pull that intake scoop inward, because we're going to have to define that shape. It's going to end sort of at this mesh or this cage that prevents leaves and things from getting in, but we're going to have to control that as well. But this is a pretty good start. It's a pretty good start. So let's go to Smooth Display. And now you can see that we are starting to get, if we hide these edges, we're starting to get a very smooth transition. We view this from the top. That looks pretty good. It's following the door lines, and then we flare out to where we want it. If we view it from the front, You can see that we've got that big scoop. If we hide the mesh, you can see that here is the door line, and then here's the intake scoop we're building. We can obviously make this a bit more dramatic. We can take it further out. But at this stage, that looks pretty good. We might even want to make this smaller. It doesn't need to be that big, but we might want to just simply adjust it and pull it up. Let's go ahead and take a look at this box display. Let's do a quick save. Again, in Fusion 360, anytime you save that version, you always have a point you can go back to. This is extremely important when we're dealing with forms because it is destructive in nature. We're not capturing history. So save as often as you want. And if you make an adjustment and you want to capture that, so for example, let's say that I move this vertex here and I say okay, and I save, you can create a milestone if you get to a point where you think that the design is it's pretty close, or there's a big thing that we did, like when we finished off this entire shape, it was like the second save, then we could have created a milestone and said, we flared the intake. And the reason that's important is because this data, I'm just going to say save point here, but this data is carried along with those versions. So if we go into the data panel, we look at the version history, you can see that the user comment there is called save point. Now the save point is just that comment that we added in. The milestone data is actually going to be captured when we view these on the web. So that information is captured in there, but keep in mind that unless you view it on the web, you're not typically going to see everything. But so you can see here we've got save point, the milestone with the little flag flared the intake. So as descriptive as you can possibly be at this stage, if you are doing these multiple saves, is going to be important. All right, so now let's talk more about the shape and what we want to do to actually make this work. I'm going to temporarily go to my display settings. I'm going to go to wireframe so I can kind of see where that original intake was and determine whether or not we want to slide this edge or divide it up a bit more. I'm thinking that we probably don't want to carry this intake down this far. Even though we have the style line, we probably want to merge these two together. And I can do that in wireframe. I'm going to go to weld vertices. I want to take probably this one and bring it forward. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to go back into my shaded display. And let's take a look at this in smooth display. So again, all we're doing is we're sort of manipulating the opening. That looks pretty good. We do have this sort of, probably less than ideal situation here. But as soon as we add some more detail to this, and let's just do a temporary thing. I'm going to go to a front view. Actually, let's do it from the top view. I'm going to go to a top view, and I'm going to extrude with a crease. I'm going to bring that in. And I'm going to say, okay, go back to a right view. As soon as we extrude that in with a crease, now you can really see that this is going to be a potential issue. If we view it in box display, this is something that we're going to have to work on to make right. And part of the reason is because it goes in and then back out. So we can really spend some time figuring out this, but at this stage in the process, it's not worth the effort. Now it's going to be worth the effort. Let's go ahead and flip this around so we can see it right. It's going to be worth the effort at some point, but at this stage, it's not worth it. This is still, we're roughing out the shapes. We're still figuring out what we want this thing to look like. So I'm going to continue doing some manual manipulations, and I want to take these edges and I want to move the edges. And this is instead of doing the vertices, because I'm trying to keep the width of these consistent, even though they're not perfectly consistent. At some point, we're going to come back and we're going to potentially redo the layout here. But I want to sort of figure out what I want that shape to be, move them around, and then maybe we'll bring this one up manually. All right, let's look at this from the front, see what we're working with here. All right, so those are set in pretty far, and if we rotate this a little bit, this one's set in pretty far. So that is going to give us a more drastic sort of roll in. If we want to flatten that out, then we can do that manually by, again, moving these around. Or the best trick is to get rid of these divisions. And it's going to smooth itself out. And then we need to come back manually. And I'm going to take probably these two edges. Let's offset them. Let's try 0.25. single insertion. It's probably a bit far. Let's try 0.125 and we'll say okay. And then we'll use insert point, go from here to here. And let's repeat that process. So down here it gets a little bit trickier. I'm just going to draw a straight line to this one and let it divide it up how it wants. Go back into smooth display, and you can see now it doesn't roll in quite as drastically because we got rid of those divisions and we sort of let it, it's not smoothing out, but it sort of lets it take the shape of least resistance. This is still not okay down here. This is still something we need to fix, but we will worry about that a little bit later. Let's go back to box display and let's figure out what the next steps are for this shape. I think the next thing to probably do is I want to finish off this bottom edge because that's going to have an effect on the overall shape. And remember that we have a crease here, but we don't have a crease here. This is still smooth transition between here. We could add a crease, but I think later on what I want to do is just bevel that edge, or I want to add some additional edges. So I want to leave that as is for now and not make my life too difficult. But I do want to bring this back. So what I want to do is I'm going to take both of these edges, modify from the bottom. We are going to extrude. So I'm going to hold down Alt on a PC. Then I'm going to scale them vertically until I get to 0. And then I need to move this down. Notice that I switched to just using this one here. I'm not moving it left and right very much, so it's going to be fine. But what I'm looking to do is get to the bottom of the body, and then we will work on the rest of that shape. So if we take a look at this in smooth display real quick, you can see we're starting to roll under the edge. And if we take a look at the original body, it's a very smooth transition. And if we were trying to make a fender that bolted on, what we would then do is we would take this and we would extrude it down with a crease and build our little flange. I'm not going to be doing that here, but that is one way that we can continue to do that. And then we would simply push it to the mesh, our reference, and then we would replicate where the bolt holes are. So you can see that there are some bolt holes here. And when you're scanning stuff, this is typically what happens when you're occluded or you're getting into a shadow, or if you have something that's relatively shiny, you end up getting these little fragments. But at this point, again, we're just going to go underneath the body. We'll attach to it later. And I'm going to go back to box display. And I want to carry this down as well. But at this stage, I want to take this lip and I want to extrude this in. So I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to extrude this back. And in reality, this is not going to come straight back because we need space for that wheel. But for right now, for the design, I'm going to bring it straight back. I'm going to try to get it close to where I ended up here. Note that with distances, we can actually make a selection to measure when we have that input there. But because we're using the on-screen manipulators and you use the arrow, you're going to get to the same location just simply based on the snaps. It's going to be every 10 millimeters or every 5 millimeters since we're working in metric here. So we brought that back, and now we sort of just need to build this piece in. And to build that, I'm just going to use bridge. And I'm going to go from here to here. Need to rotate it around. Noting that we have this extra little piece here. So if I try to select both of these and hit OK, note that it built it and it created what we have a T-point here. So in order to sort of address or deal with that, what we could do is we could offset this edge and we could create that offset. But remember that little lip was really only there initially to help control this. So I'm actually just going to double click and delete it. And then that sort of simplifies this whole patched area. I do need to make sure that I carry that crease down underneath. So I will have to select that edge and I will want to make sure that I do crease it, at least at this point. It's probably not the best option going forward, but creasing it now is going to help me with this transition here. Okay, so now that we've sort of boxed off that section, let's go ahead and let's do the same thing at the back and figure out where we're attaching to the bumper. So I want to take this edge and I'm probably just going to extrude both of them. I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to bring it straight back until it's relatively close to the body. We can adjust this later. Let's go ahead and rotate this around. And note that this is actually going pretty far back. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take this edge, I'm going to reset my pivot point, and I want to scale it in this direction. I'm going to bring it back forward and I'm going to say OK. Then I can use my weld vertices. I can put those two together. So I'll take this one to here. say okay. And again, we're going to want to crease this. So we're going to go to modify crease, smooth display if you need to, but we want to carry that crease down at least at this point. That might be something that we change later, but this helps us with the control of the direction of curvature. And at this point, if we were to come back and say, add, let's go to insert edge just for a quick test, go to both, say okay, and then we take a look at this. Now we're able to add those sort of tighter creases if we want. If we are going to want a smoother transition, so we can go to insert edge and we can put this out at say 0.25. And again, now we've got that sort of smoother transition. And this is just a quick way for us to sort of deal with that corner. Not at that stage yet. Again, that's going to be quite a bit later. This does take quite a bit of time for us to sort of lay all the details out. And we're going to have to delete and go back and add more detail later. These are all things that we are expecting at this point. Let's go back into box display. Let's do a quick save. Again, save often. And now let's fix some of what's going on up here over the fender. Now, it looks pretty good. When we go into smooth display, it looks good. It's nice and smooth, and that's because we added those edges in. But I don't really like the way in which the patches or these edges are flowing. So this one in particular is, I don't like the way that it's flowing, and I don't like the way that these are transitioning either. So I'm going to delete those. I'm going to select these two edges, and I'm going to insert another edge. We're going to do single. I'm going to make sure that it's going the correct direction. So it's going to be minus, I'm going to do minus 0.5. And notice that this one is sort of okay, but this one obviously is not right. So we'll just delete that. Come to modify, insert point, and we'll connect this. Now, it's also important to note, depending on the level of control we need, we can make triangles if we absolutely have to. Now, it's something that we do tend to avoid. It's not a 100% rule, but the four sides are going to be much easier for us to do things like subdivide. It's going to be much easier for us to control the geometry. And the main reason for that is because the triangles are going to be planes. They're going to be perfectly flat. Whereas when we make a four-sided face, I'm going to go ahead and just adjust this a little bit. When we make a four-sided face, we are able to adjust the curvature because only three of those vertices, three of the points, are going to be on the same plane. So that makes it really easy for us to have curvature when we have four-sided faces. When we have a three-sided face, it's always going to be completely flat. It's going to be a flat plane. So let's take a quick look. Pretty happy with that result so far. It looks pretty smooth. When we get rid of the edges, I don't really see too much concern until we get to about here. And if we take a look, that's where we sort of go from having a lot of control to not a lot of control. So what I want to do is I want to change the location of this edge, and I want to begin to bring it forward. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to delete these two. I want to take this edge and I want to slide it until a spot where I'm happy. So I'm going to push it over to about right in the middle. And then I'm going to use insert point. I'm going to go to a right-hand view. And I'm going to come down straight. And then I want to come to that point and say, okay. So again, what we're looking for here is the smooth transition here. And it's always a good idea for us to go into utilities and repair, like we have these star points, like this one right here is really bad. And if we use auto repair, sometimes it's able to work on those and fix them. We are going to have to do some manual work in that area, unfortunately, but this does help us with the overall shape of the fender. Before we get into adding any more control, the last thing that we really want to focus our attention on is what happens at the back. And we've already brought this back and this attaches to the fender, but this can't just be a thin section. We're going to have a lip or some sort of shape here. And we need to decide if now is a good time to do that, or if we should potentially do it later on in the design after we add more control. Now, it's going to kind of depend on if we're going to crease this edge or if we're going to have a smooth transition to the back. If we want to roll this in and have, you know, some nice aerodynamic features maybe, then that's where we're going to have to really consider what the transition is going to be. For this design, I think we're going to leave it fairly open, so I'm not going to do anything there. But what I would suggest is if you're making a design and you want to sort of cap this off, then now's the time when you should do that in this sort of stage of roughing out the concept. Again, that's not where we are in this design. I think I'm going to leave it fairly open, but now is the time that you would want to cap that off, especially if you want to add a lot of aero details to the back, maybe some vents or some fins or something, then it would be a good time to sort of work on that. All right, so again, quick save, make sure that we're not losing any of our work. At this point, now I'm going to start to manipulate where this intake is and how I want that to look. I'm going to switch over to smooth display, and I'm going to begin just sort of manipulating the locations, keeping in mind that we can always use the tricks that we've learned for deleting edges, modifying the location of the edges by using insert. And I think I'm going to take these three and I want to push them forward a bit. Again, making this a little bit more exaggerated. And I have to deal with this. I have to deal with that corner there. So I'm going to go back into box display, and I really have to think about the way that this patch is going. So this shape right here, again, we've already looked at this, but this shape is carried on by this little extra inserted edge, which goes away as soon as we hit that corner. So really what has to happen is this edge needs to go away, and I need to add more detail here. So I'm going to do that by first taking this edge, I'm going to rotate this around, and I'm going to extrude this one in. I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm just going to pull it in 20 millimeters. I'm going to view this. I'm going to pull this back a little bit, and I want to scale it vertically. And I want to make sure that those vertices at the bottom are sort of inset. So this is the starting point for rebuilding the rest of the shape. The next thing I need to do is I need to decide if it's okay for me to just delete edges, or if I need to delete entire faces and figure this shape out. So to do this, I want to hide the mesh body because it's kind of in the way. And I need to really think about the flow of this patch here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this edge and this edge. I'm going to go to, I really need this vertex here to attach here. So in order to make that work, I'm going to go to Insert Point, and I'm going to make a triangle. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to repeat the process up here. I'm going to make a triangle and say OK. Now this gives me the ability to weld this vertex to here and this vertex to here, and then I can deal with that triangle afterwards. So now we've got a triangle here, 4 sides here, a triangle here, 4 sides here. So we've effectively changed the direction, but we did it with that sort of 3-sided triangle. It's going to be really bad because of this face, but let's take a quick look in smooth display, and you can see that face is causing problems, but the rest of it is okay at this point. It's not perfect, but it's okay. So back in box display, now is the time where we really need to sort of figure out how this corner is going to work and how we're going to divide this up. And if you don't know at this point, so you can see we've got this triangle down here, but if you don't know how it's going to break up at this point, the best thing is to start deleting edges and adding new edges in and see if you can figure out how this patch is going to work. So at this point, I don't want this triangle here. I want this to be 4 sides. So I'm going to carry this down. I'm going to carry it all the way down into the skirt area, and then I can delete this edge. And now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I've got an nGon, which I really need this to be 4-sided, or I really want this to be 4-sided. So it's going to be difficult for us to get that to happen unless this vertex ends up connecting here and we sort of wrap this shape over, and then we just have a single edge here. So the way that I'm going to sort of play around with this is I'm going to insert that edge back. So again, 4-sided, and then I'm going to delete these two. I'm going to try to delete those two. So now we got rid of that, but you can see here now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we didn't solve the problem necessarily, we just sort of made some adjustments to it. So now, again, in order to sort of explore how we're going to fix this, I'm going to go from here, and if I'm trying to make a 4-sided patch, I've got 1, 2, and then I need to make 3 coming into this edge somewhere, but I really want to go to the corner. So I'm just going to go up to the middle of this and say OK, which makes this 4-sided, And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. So we're pretty close. We're pretty close. And now I can take this and I'm just going to manipulate it a little bit. So that way it's a little bit better visually for us to see what we have. Let's do a quick check in Smooth Display. And in Smooth Display, it actually does not look too bad. If we do utilities and repair body, we have a star point here and we have a star point here. We can turn that one into a T point, and the geometry in that corner is actually really good. So this is one of those instances where we're trying to change the direction. Let's go back to box display. We're trying to change the direction, and doing this without triangles is going to be difficult. So making this happen without triangles is going to be difficult. It's not impossible. So in this upper corner, what we would do is we would come down to here, and we would come down to here, and then I'm going to take these two and delete them, and now that's four-sided. So if we look at that in Smooth Display, you can see that this looks pretty good, but then we've created that star point there. So again, depending on how you approach this, one way or another is going to be problematic, and it kind of just depends on the geometry you're working with. If I get rid of these edges and just sort of rotate that around, you can kind of, it's very hard, it's very faint to see, but you can kind of see there's a little bit of something happening in that corner. We can also take a look at zebra analysis. I'm going to make the lines horizontal. I'm going to increase the repeat so it's a little bit more bunched up. So you can see this looks pretty good here. As it rolls down, we've got something happening here that we need to deal with and address. You can see that the bottom, where we've got that five-sided, that nGon, it looks okay, but you can kind of see there's something going on here. And we haven't added all the control yet, so I'm not too concerned. But here, you can really see that the lines that we would expect to see, if this was in the sunlight and we were looking at shadows and reflections, you can see this part right here is going to be a problem. I'm going to say okay, go into the analysis folder that's created and hide the zebra stripes. I want to show my edges, and you can kind of see that happens exactly where that vertex is, that one that's pulling it. And if we go down here, this is that sort of five-sided patch where we have the T-point. Now the T-point itself is fine, but you can kind of see that this face that has that T-point on it and this corner, they are starting to create some geometry that's probably less than ideal. We really don't like these star points because this is what happens. So again, something that we're going to have to address and deal with. It doesn't mean that we should stop what we're doing in our design. It just means that we need to be mindful of all of the design decisions that we make and what kind of effect they have. This five-sided star point is not really a big deal because of the geometry around it is fairly flat. This one here is more of a problem because we have so much change in curvature. And the one that's down here, this T-point, is not a huge problem, but because we've got a star point right next to it, that's when the issues really start to arise. So these are things that, again, we want to try to avoid. So I'm going to go to Modify, Insert Point. I'm just going to take that right up to the middle. And now I've got 4 here and 4 here. I turned them both into four-sided, and I carried that geometry all the way down. Let's go ahead and bring our zebra stripes back. And looks a little bit better. Good time for us to do a quick save to make sure that we don't lose anything. So Control S. All right, so let's go back to box display and let's talk about fixing some of the things that we've done at this point. So we know that down here, we turn those both into four-sided faces, which is going to give us a better result. I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to make some tweaks and make sure that I'm okay with this opening. So I really want to start to manipulate some of these vertices. And this detail work is really not going to have much of an effect on the overall shape because it's sort of inside and independent, at least on these inside edges. So I want to get these right. I want to get them in the correct position. And all I'm really doing is, again, I'm trying to follow some sort of, I don't want to say symmetry because that's not the right word, but I really want to follow some sort of uniformity. If I'm going to be changing the size or the location of something, I want to do it gradually. I don't want it to be very drastic. And, so like having all of these smaller faces here and the bigger ones here is not something I typically like. And that's simply because we just haven't added as much control in these other areas yet because we don't have those fine details. It's always a good idea to go back and forth and check things like smooth display. And what we're going to be trying to do is again, in the mesh, the car actually has this detail, this feature that we want to carry around, and we want it to come back to the door somewhere down around here. So that's going to kind of dictate or drive where some of the shape happens. So like this edge and this vertex here are probably going to come down, and I need to start to bring some of this down as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry the lines from the fender. I'm going to bring them down and forward. When we're working in box display mode, something that we always want to sort of keep in mind is what we're doing is we're creating and controlling the shape, the box shape that is going to drive the curvature. Now, the box shape and the smooth shape are not going to exactly match. The edges tend to move around. It kind of just depends on the surrounding edges and geometry. But what we're trying to do in box display is we're trying to get this thing to look, the control edges to look like we would expect. What I think is going to end up happening is I'm probably going to make an nGon, a 5-sided shape over here where it hits the fender. This kind of transition going from these faces going vertically to horizontally, this is always going to be the tricky spot. Wherever we end up getting this sort of 5-sided star point, that's usually going to be tricky, and we have to be careful with the amount of control we have. So I think I'm probably going to end up dividing this up in the middle and then turning this into a 5-side later down the road. Again, these are just things that I'm thinking of as I'm designing, and I really don't like that point. It might still look okay, but I know I'm going to add more control here, and it's going to be more problematic. As soon as we take an edge and we cut this into a small triangle, that's when we're going to start to run into trouble. So these are things that I'm thinking of as I'm going through this process. Everything in terms of the flow of these edges, so this one goes straight, this one starts to taper down, this one tapers down more, this one tapers down more. This is going to help me go from the stock size body and flare out. It's going to give us that sort of widening effect. We're going to have more control, but we don't ever want to add that too soon because it's going to just be harder for us to get a smooth transition. Now that I know about where that edge is, I want to go to Insert Point, and I'm just going to bring this down. Again, I'm looking to keep this mainly in line. And again, I'm doing that from the side. From the front, it's not going to be in line. But, from the front or the top, it's not going to be in line because that's where we get our curvature from. But from the side, I really want to focus on getting this sort of tapering effect to work. So that means that this edge here, I probably want to slide it down a bit and have it pull the rest of that. And then I probably want to move this one down as well. And keep in mind that also what I'm doing is I'm taking this shape and I'm starting to carry it both straight up into this opening here, and I also am turning it this direction. So we have two things that we have to do because the curvature changes. We're going to have a star point here and it changes directions. So we have to be extremely mindful of that. This vertex here, I'm going to pull back to mimic more of the door shape. I'm going to taper this one down a bit more. We might actually end up breaking this up or pulling this down a little bit more as well, so we can pull that forward and get that shape a little bit closer. When we go to smooth display, it looks okay, but in box display, we're getting it a little bit closer. Let's hide the main body again, and let's focus our attention here. Let's see what this thing looks like in smooth display. So it's looking okay. I probably want to bring that down. Let's go ahead and go to a right view, and let's just take this edge and let's bring it down. Probably scale it down a little bit. And what I'm looking for again is I don't want it too drastic of a pinch here. And I probably want to pull that out a little bit as well. And with these edges up front, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and pull them forward a little bit as well. Take a look at it in smooth display. Again, that looks pretty good. It's starting to flare back into the car, and then we're going to have to carry this as like a scoop backwards. I'm not going to do that section until I'm happy with the shape and the opening, because again, it's just going to add more edges or more control than I want. Let's bring back the scan of the body and just take a look. I'm going to temporarily go into my wireframe display so I can kind of see the shape here and I can see the car underneath. And so far that looks pretty good. I'm happy with the way that the shape, the opening is happening. I am going to work on this corner a bit more. Um, I'm happy with the way that this shape is working out. You can see in smooth display that these edges don't look quite as nice as they do in box display, but that's because, again, the surrounding curvature, this large face over here, is pulling this more than these smaller faces. So you can see that the smaller faces have sort of left these their original size, but the larger faces are pulling more. You can see the distance between this edge and this edge is quite a bit further. So it's extending this out, and that has an effect on curvature. Another thing to note is when we double click on an edge, it'll give you the entire sort of loop or the tangency that goes along with that. Anytime that ends at a star point, like we have here, it's going to stop, which means if we try to do like an insert edge, it's going to stop at that point and it's not going to work. So the same thing is true for here and here. You can see that carries all the way down. So if we want to add or insert edges, then we're going to have to do it in two parts, and we're going to have to skip this star point. So if I go to modify, insert edge, I'll put it right in the middle, and you can see that it put it on the wrong side, so Control Z. I'll do it again. That's one problem with this tool right now. For whatever reason, there's a bug, and even though it displays correctly the first time, even it remembers our setting, our negative setting, but the correct display is not in the right location. So I'm going to take these two, go to modify, insert edge, again half, and then I'll use insert point to connect them at the end. Again, we're avoiding that star point. Let's go back to our display with edges, which is Control and 6 for me. I can do Control and 4 to hide the edges. And you can kind of see that star point back here is causing problems in that surface that we're going to have to address. And you can kind of see that everything looks okay here, but if we weren't happy with the shape before we added those edges, it's not going to have any help. But looking at the shape here, what I'm thinking going forward is I want to take this door line and I'm going to bring the door line up as a sort of a harder reference edge and flare out to the fender. I'm going to take this edge or this door line, it's going to carry around the intake scoop. And I'm also going to take something similar or relatively close, and I'm going to carry that back on the top. I'm not really sure what's going to happen in the middle yet, but that's what we're going to do. The next steps from here, again, because we're already 40 minutes in, the next steps for here is going to be for me to fix this star point. We can try to do it really quickly. And now we've got this sort of 5-sided face. If we go to smooth display, we still have these edges intersecting, but there's only 4 of them, which means that we got rid of that star point, which means that the surface is actually going to be better. Even though we've got that nGon, that 5-side, it looks better. You can see that it's sort of bulging in at that point. The curvature will tell you that, the zebra stripes. You can kind of see how we've got this big blotch here right in the middle. And that one that sort of pops up, that tells me that there's a pocket or there's a dip in the body. And you can kind of see that when you rotate it, it's starting to happen right at that edge. It's dipping in. We can try to use repair body and fix some of those errors and let it sort of work itself out. But sometimes that just pushes it to a new location. Now you can see we've got a problem there. So this is something that I'm going to fix manually. I'm going to Control Z, undo the star point fix. But just note that once we start to add more detail, we're potentially going to start introducing some problems. So the next steps, again, that 5-sided, that nGon is probably going to be the best option going forward. I'm going to have to do the same thing back here, probably add another edge, another division, and do a 5-side here where we're sort of turning the corner and changing direction to make sure that the shape is nice and smooth. And then we'll begin adding those details in. So we're going to add some more detail around this intake scoop. We are going to get really close to pushing it to the body, but we're going to start adding the detail like the features that carry back. And we could decide to carry this door feature back that on the actual car just simply carried around this intake scoop. We could decide to carry it back and up and over the fender, for example. We could carry this one back and up and over. Kind of just depends on the aesthetic you're looking for. But at this stage, we've gotten a little bit further. I know it probably doesn't seem like we've done much, but we have gotten further. We've added more control. We've sort of changed the direction. We're now going to make our own intake scoop and not worry about the stock one. So now we've sort of worked out that we're going to attach here to the door, and we're just sort of addressing problems as they come up. I don't really know how long this is going to take. It is much quicker doing it without talking through it, but after the first video, which was, over 50 minutes, it seems like that's fairly popular. So it seems like anybody who's actually watching this wants to know a bit more about the thought process and maybe some of the reasons why I'm deleting edges or adding edges at certain times, and what that really means to the design. So again, if that's helpful, let me know, and I will continue to make the longer videos as we continue to detail this out. I'm really hoping now that the basic shape is done, the details will just be in the next video and we'll be done with it. But again, we might get sidetracked a little bit and start to play around with a few things. But at this point, that's as far as we're going to take it in this video. So I'm going to save it one more time. As always, if you have any questions or comments, leave them below the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.